more. Sure, it felt like a cult, and that should have been a warning sign, but you have no idea how nice it was to finally feel like I fit in somewhere. It was so weird getting used to the fact that no one could hear me, but it was kind of nice that I didn't need to worry about my screaming nightmares waking anyone up. I liked to think of myself as strong and independent, so I really enjoyed not having to wake up from a nightmare to people fussing over me. I even made my first real friend. She was the second oldest, and her name was Kirsten. She was super awkward, but I really appreciated having someone my age to connect with. She even taught me sign language. I got pretty used to this new lifestyle, waking up at dawn, harvesting all the vegetables, and I hadn't even spoken a single word. I went from an Instagram model who wore hot clothes and got in trouble to a saint, like figuratively and literally. Not only was I staying out of trouble and gaining control of my behavior, but the other girls looked up to me like I was a prophet. They asked me tons of questions about life on the outside. Most of the girls were brought here as toddlers or infants, so they had no exposure to TVs, malls, or even processed sugar. This one girl, Susie, asked me how you feed the people that live on TV so that they can perform for you. Kirsten's favorite thing for me to describe was cheese puffs. The concept of such a treat was godly and fantasy-like to her. I told her that I promised I would bring her back some once I moved out. She always got weird when I brought up leaving. I always assumed it was because she would miss me, and I was about to find out it was a little more complicated than that. Don't get me wrong, though. I was ready to leave. I appreciated everything they did. Even after everything, I don't regret the time I spent there. Still, I was counting down the days to my 18th birthday when I could move out. That's when
Back to competition.
everything changed. I wrote the nun asking what I should do about moving back to the city, and she got really weird. She asked what about everything here, the life I had with the other children. She asked why I wasn't happy. I assured her that nothing was wrong, and I loved them all. I told her I wanted to go out into the real world, get a job, and fall in love. She seemed to understand, but she said something next that made me question everything. I guess you won't get to meet him if you leave, she sighed. She explained that there was a new boy coming to work at the estate as a gardener the week after my 18th birthday. She'd never mentioned him before, but she said she thought she would keep it as a surprise because she really thought we would hit it off. I should have sensed something was suspicious, but she convinced me to stay. Try not to judge me. I hadn't seen a boy in years. I have to admit, I was pretty happy I did, at least at first. The boy came all right. He was everything I hoped for. He was handsome and seemed very nice. Not only that, he could speak and hear just like me. The nun immediately introduced us and even encouraged me to speak, something she hadn't done the entire time I lived there. It felt so weird talking after a couple of years of complete silence. I was embarrassed by how poorly the words came out and how weak my voice was. But he was super sweet and showed a keen interest in me. He even called my little voice super cute. At first, it was really flattering, but there was something off about him. For one thing, he was very close to the nun and always had private meetings with her. Another problem was that I never actually saw him gardening. One day, out of nowhere, he proposed to me after only knowing me for a week. I freaked out. He was very insulted, explaining he came here and paid big money to take me as his wife. He was promised that I would be submissive, and refusing his proposal was not submissive. He paid the nun for me? I freaked out and ran to my room to pack. That's when the nun came in and tried to explain everything. But this time, she spoke to me. She'd lied about being mute. She explained how she needed money for her medical expenses, and a dowry was the only logical thing to do, and the girls weren't fit for life in the real world. I told her that she needed to give the girls a chance. The world wasn't as scary as she made it out to be. Freedom was everything. The nun simply apologized. I thought she was coming around, but she locked me in the room. I screamed for help, but all of the children were deaf. The only people who could hear me were the nun and the crazy man who wanted to marry me. There was nowhere to go and no one to help me. I only had one option to avoid living in my room for the rest of my life. I agreed to marry him. I put on a big show and he fell for me immediately. Kirsten slipped me a note. She said I wasn't the first person the nun had married off, and they all disappeared shortly after. She knew that she would be next, as the second oldest, so she begged me to follow her plan so we could break the cycle. The nun was grooming submissive girls to marry off to weird men when they turned 18. On the day of the wedding, I pretended to be sick, very sick. The girl who helped me offered to accompany me to the hospital. She wrote a note to the nun explaining that my fever was very high and it was too dangerous for the nun to come near me. She was suspicious and insisted she come. The girl and I got into the car first, and when the nun tried to hop in, we pushed her to the ground, locked the doors, and drove off. We drove over 40 minutes before we found a town. There, we told the police everything that had happened. We were raised on a crazy wife farm. That's not even the craziest part of the story. See, when the police drove out there, they found the mansion, but it was completely empty. They had to use search dogs, which led them to another disturbing discovery. Underneath the farm we worked on, there was a huge secret. All the money she got from selling brides was used to build a giant underground bunker. She was part of a huge church, which included every family she sold the brides to. The kids were all rescued, but the nun was never found. Kirsten and I still live with each other. We are in the process of opening up our own foster home. We still keep in touch with some of the other girls we lived with. And yes, we have cheese puffs almost every day. Still, I can't help thinking she's out there somewhere, plotting her revenge. Sometimes I find crosses left in random places. The worst thing that happened last night, though, I was looking through my camera for some funny photos I'd taken when I saw pictures of Kirsten and I sleeping. I always thought I could sense someone peering at us in the middle of the night, but I chalked it up to my usual nightmares. I don't know if I should tell Kirsten or not, but I'm running out of excuses for why we need to move to a new apartment every month.
Guys, I'm gonna end the video right here.